barrio. Que tú tirijala y que bien todo compones. Mentiras tuyas, solo mentiras, porque en el barrio hay mucha alegría. A la, pruébame lo tuyo para yo creerte. Pruébame lo tuyo para yo creerte. Suéname la conga, suena el bongo, suena el timbal. Inspírate, hermano, con mucha alegría, porque ahorita aquí vengo yo.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon out there in radio world. You're listening to 103.5 FM WNHH Independent.org, community radio powered by La Voz Hispana. This is Keeping It 100 with Jose Candelario. This is a special report. Special, not only because Paul Bass is with us today. Paul Bass is the owner and editor-in-chief here at the New Haven Independent. And has taken out some time out of his busy schedule from NPR and all the other bigger interviews that he has during the day to join us, and having a real brief discussion. Last week, recently we've had people on the radio here, such as Darnell Golson, talking about the Board of Ed. There's been an article in the New Haven Register with Mr. Kimber, who was also talking about education, and then most recently, the Independent had another article on Golson where he's disputing the contracts with the buses and the school, and there's something another great article that the New Haven Independent put out there. So the question that was proposed to me by individuals, and it's crazy because it came from institutions, is why do we, I guess the media, specifically New Haven Register, Independent, News 8, why do we continue to give individuals like Golson and Kimber a platform to view their ideas and perspectives? So, Paul, you're the king here.
I'm no king. It's a pleasure to be on with you, Jose. Let's go to report news.
To report
we don't
news.
do public relations. So this is the whining you hear from people in power when they get a lot of people to agree with them, either because they agree with them or they get bought off or whatever. So if you have a body that votes on something, let's say Board of Alders, Board of Ed, and everybody's lined up behind one idea, and then you have one or two critics who, for whatever reason, don't agree.
Yep.
The reality in the world is much more complicated. Like the schools are completely failing on teaching kids to read, right? So there's a lot of discussion about that. So they didn't want to be held accountable, so they didn't show up to public. They canceled interviews here. They threw us out of a symposium that was online about it. They actually threw us out because they didn't want people hearing about it. And they don't want anyone, in government, it's a natural human reaction. You want to just have your side out, and you don't want anyone to question you or criticize you. Fundamental to our democracy, fundamental to the pursuit for truth, fundamental to tackling any challenges as a community is the ability to question people in power, the status quo, and government policy. That happens with the help of critics who are paying attention for whatever reason. Sometimes critics got iced out of a contract, so they have bad motives. Sometimes they have good motives. They care about education. Most people, a little more complicated, right? So you often have a dissenter. Dissent is fundamentally what separates us from communist or fascist or any closed society. We can't have democracy without dissent. And we can't do our job by dissent. I mean, someone who doesn't agree with what people in power are doing. So if they raise questions, we don't just say, well, we'll write an article, and since there are 6 people on the Board of Ed who aren't questioning the total failure of the Board of Education, we should have them quoted 6 times, and then if there's one person who's raising a question that's fundamental to everything everyone cares, with 20,000 public school kids in the city, they should get a little sentence at the end because they're only 1 out of 7. No. There are different ways of looking at it, and questions are raised, and our job is to find out what are those questions. Our job is to give voice to all sides in the debate, including theirs if they're willing to give it. What often happens when government is failing is they circle the wagons, they hide, they come out with very prepared press comments, they pressure people who depend on them to shut their mouths, And then our job is to get beyond that. Give their side for sure. Public education is difficult. The people who are on the Board of Ed have devoted their lives and done great work for kids. They're great people. We're not any smarter. But like anyone else in power, they need to be held accountable. They need to be questioned. One group of people who help in that process is the center. And it's up to the public to say, is Reverend Kimber someone with good motives or bad? And separate from that, is he right, which he is, that they're failing on reading? He didn't have a better plan, but he said they're right. When we have negotiations with teachers, we're losing teachers like all places around the country, but we're losing more of them.
Yep.
And they can't teach there. It's a crisis. Kids are going to school now where half their courses, they're not even learning the courses. They're getting sent to the auditorium or sent home because there's no one to teach. So what could be more important than talk about what's the best way to go about it? So Darnell Goldson raises excellent questions. He has his own ideas. We could debate about that.
Right, yeah.
And they're mad that it gets quoted. If you didn't have him on, Jose, if we didn't put him in the Independent, we would be falling down on our jobs and we would have no reason to exist.
And it's almost like it's our fault for having more viewers than they have attending.
They always blame the press. So Richard Nixon perfected this, and everybody on either side of the political spectrum does this. Justin Ellicker does it. You blame the press for answering questions. If something didn't go well, you blame the messenger. But you know what? That's transparent. When they do that, you know they're on the running. You need more. You need more questioning.
And that was the issue that we discussed was transparency. I mean, there seems to be a lack of transparency from the Board of Ed, and the retort was, we have press conferences and we have meetings.
Very rare press conferences. They go into an executive session for most of their meetings, so you don't even know what they're really talking about because they're hiding. And they do it on Zoom. The kids go to school. The teachers go to school. They do it on Zoom, so you can't ask them any questions afterwards. That is a farce. To call this transparent is like saying that right now it's snowing, which is not.
And what people here dissenter, these are people who are not going with the status quo. They're not going with the majority. These are individuals.
And that doesn't make them right or wrong.
It's not a right or
and
wrong.
It doesn't make them always having better or worse motives or smarter or less smart. Although Darnell Golson's a very intelligent man. He's been in public service for decades. He has always played a role of raising really interesting questions. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have democracy.
I mean, and he's questioning the process. That's all he's doing is bringing up the process, how the process works, and where the process fails. You know,
as soon as they're complaining, the same Board of Ed that kicked our own reporter out of the only discussion at the time about why they were defying a state law about how to teach kids reading at a time when kids only read. For them to then complain, why are you quoting somebody else? My heart does not bleed.
So you do not feel sorry for them at all.
I sympathize with what a hard job they have. I respect them. Dr. Tracy was a great teacher and administrator. Her whole career, she's a terrific human being. People in power, I'd be no different. You feel like when you're in power, you work so hard. These people have a variety of motives. They don't realize how hard it is. We're doing the best we can. But then the wagons get circled. And without us making them uncomfortable, without Jose publishing or broadcasting a show that makes people raise questions and the people in power saying, Jose, why'd you do that? I don't like you doing that. If you're not doing that, they're not going to do your jobs as well.
Oh, trust me, I've been tagged as controversial. Like
John DeStefano was the mayor for 20 years ago.
Like I'm looking for it. I'm not looking for controversy.
John DeStefano was mayor for 20 years. They had a big scandal about 6 years in. Some articles I had written, FBI came in. He was so mad at the time. And later on, he said that made him a better mayor.
Wow.
He did a better job because the heat was on. Even though he didn't agree that necessarily all the criticism was true. That's how you can tell who's going to succeed, who can get above it. Right now, I'll tell you something Mayor Justin Ellicker said. He always says, we have this great plan. He does press conferences, like they press conferences. Oh, that's transparent. We have press conference, and he had a bunch of plans, but he said what date he's going to get stuff done by. Tom Breen, a reporter at The Independent and editor, he said he keeps track. So a year goes by, 2 years go by, there never is a crisis control team. He said, you said it was going to be by this date. So Ellicker's response isn't we need to do better. It's I need to stop ever saying what date anything is going to do. He complains about it. He whines about this in public because then Tom Breen is going to ask me, why didn't you do it by this date? So I'm not going to give you a date. That is what and he's a good guy, Ellicker. He's like, this is what people are like when they get in power. They have the thinnest skin, they get defensive, and they need people like Tom Breen in his mild-mannered, fair way, or Jose in his opening the mic to everybody. We will let them down and the public if we don't make them break a sweat and have to not just retreat in their defensiveness into their bubble.
We are basically holding people accountable. We're the watchdogs, and people do act differently when they're being watched. I mean, it's just a science fact. When they're being watched, they act differently. And would you consider the independent like a watchdog?
Yeah, but we're not like, we also very much sympathize and support people in public service. They give a lot of long nights and days and probably give up income to serve the public and do their job. So we don't want to be mean. We don't want to make fun of them. We don't want to make them feel sweat because their privacy would be invaded. We want public issues to be aired, debated, revealed. And so we want them to sweat to know that they're being watched and held accountable. But we see our job as reporting. That's what reporting
is. And this is community radio. It's community radio.
And you have to give dissenting voices. If you don't give dissenting voices, we'll often be heard more. I remember Ben DeLito was the mayor in the 80s. He was a really sweet man, a gentleman. He had been a police chief. And there were 30 members on the board of alders, and about 27 or 8 did everything he said. So he said, Paul, how come every time you write an article, you quote Chuck Allen and John Einhorn? They were two alders who were very critical and really, really smart. Because they had a fundamental difference about trickle-down economics in the 80s and our pursuit of that policy.
Yep.
They weren't always right, they were always wrong. They raised the greatest questions. And I said to them, because they raised the questions, I'm not going to have just 18 people quoted or 28 people saying the exact same thing you just said. We will say what you said, and we'll look at what's true rather than people just saying stuff. But it's a hard person to understand. If I were in government, I work day and night, like, Dr. Tracy, Mayor Urkel, they work really long hours, and they do care about doing a good job. They're human beings like anybody else. I think it feels bad to then be questioned. And when, sometimes people don't have good motives, and the mayor sometimes will cut a deal, not because it's the right thing, because he wants to be in power, and he'll say it's because he wants to get his policies through. It doesn't make him a bad person. But, I can understand in their shoes, I would feel just as bad if Jose or Paul were giving the mic to someone that they didn't give the mic to. But too bad, grow up. That's the job.
Reminds me of Ed Murrow.
Good night, good luck.
Good night, good luck. Yeah, with George Clooney. One of the greatest movies, because New Haven Independent is one of the last objective news entities left, because you and specifically Tom always provides a balance of the perspective.
That includes the dissenter. And what they never realize is if you're in power, you still get to tell your story. They still get the first say
they
what
have
happened.
The narrative. They have first shot at it.
And then they also have their own means of communication with nowadays with the blast on email and the robocalls.
Yep.
Directly parents hear from the superintendent everything she has to say. That's fine. But there needs to be independent media as well if we're going to have a democracy and a better community.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much for your time.
Always
I will not
a pleasure,
keep you,
my friend. You are the new superstar on radio, and I'm honored to be in the same booth with you.
Stop it.
But I noticed something, though. We're out of time because the clock in the studio says it's 20:06. We've been kind of stuck there, so we got to figure what that means existentially for us, Jose.
That's the time. That's the time that the powers that be are going to energize us and give us and the spirits come out at that. That's our witching hour. Actually, 5:40 is our witching hour. So, and that's what time I actually get up to come in the morning now for the morning show. So thank you very much, Paul, for having me. This is Keeping It 100 with Jose Candelario. That was Paul Bass having a discussion on why we give the platform to certain individuals, our community, and the reason why we are here. And it's for you, the community. This is Community Radio. I'm Jose Candelario, and this has been Keeping It 100.
Dicen que tú eres el mejor del barrio.